Hello, we're live again. Thank you for being with us. My name is Federico Fernandez. I'm a senior fellow with the Austrian Economic Center. The Austrian Economic Center is the main organizer of the Free Market Roadshow, and we are doing this series of events that started yesterday and will finish tomorrow with our good friends and partners of the Ayn Rand Center Romania. This is part of the digital Free Market Roadshow. We hope to be able to do the normal Free Market Roadshow tour sometime later this year, well, worst case scenario 2021. And speaking of not being able to move and not being able to do the things we want to do, we have a great speaker today and a great speech. Anders Ydstedt from Sweden. He'll be speaking about restoration of freedom, how individual mobility will have a renaissance after the crisis. Very briefly, I will introduce to you who Anders is. Anders is an advisor at Scantech Strategy Advisors. They do work with major Swedish industry and business organizations. He's also an entrepreneur, author, and chairman of Svensk Tidskrift, which is a weekly journal of politics, economics, and culture, founded in 1911. I always make the same joke. Anders did not found it. He's very young, by the way. He's an author also. He has written extensively about mobility. And online, you can find it at Twitter. His handle is at @Ydstedt, and at the website of Svensk Tidskrift, which is svensktidskrift.se. Anders will be giving a talk of 15-20 minutes, and then we'll have a few minutes for Q&A. Anders, thank you very much for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Federico, and thank you for having me today talking about restoration of freedom. As I understand, the most subjects today is about freedom and not so much perhaps about money, but an economy, but about freedom. And one of my favorite areas to talk about, as Federico mentioned, is individual mobility. And I will talk a little bit about what I think we can see in the crisis now, that actually individual mobility is, of course, there is lockdowns and borders are closed, but we can see people are solving their transportation needs and mobility needs on their own in much higher degree than before. And I think we will see that after the crisis also. And of course, there is less risk to transport yourself walking or bicycling or taking your own car than going by public transport. And that will probably have a upswing in the market share also after the crisis. But I think this is a bigger issue than not only transport economics or transport planning or something like that. I think there is a political case against individual mobility in many countries. Politicians they say they talk about environment and so, but I think actually the big issue is they prefer the political control that you have on mass transit. When politicians decide a time schedule and where the transportation should go and so on. And we can, in many countries, see various regulations against private transportation as cars. And we also have very punitive taxation against cars in many countries. And but I think we can see in this crisis that cars are safe, not also for viruses. And that shows a lot of studies. I've seen Bloomberg News had made a study about what's happening in China when the lockdown goes down. People are buying more cars than ever. And we see the same. I saw a German study 2 weeks ago showing the same thing, asking people how will they prefer to travel after a crisis. And why is this a question for libertarians? I think while in other areas central planning has been ruled out, in traffic it has become widely accepted, and this is perhaps strange. We can see forces trying to regulate and limit free mobility of goods and service, and I think that transportation could be coordinated to be more efficient. And I'm not thinking about smarter business models. I think car sharing and other private business models is very good, but I think the political preference for urban planning to replace individual transport with mass transit is mostly actually done as a way to control how people live and how they live their lives and so. And I think this is, we should look for that and see it for what it is. I think also we can see in many countries that regulators want to replace mobility in cities with accessibility. They say that we could plan cities so we could live close to where we work and close to where there are services, and we have all our needs in our vicinity. But that also requires that someone knows everyone's needs. And I think we should go back to Hayek when he explained in The Use of Knowledge how knowledge is dispersed among people and why central planning will fail. And it's impossible to know how everyone's need for where to go actually, and when to go, and together with whom, and so. And there is the people. We have no central planners for the economy, but we have central planners for traffic, and they try to plan the transport systems in our cities. But what they do, they merely observe patterns and attempt to meet people's need based on this information. But there's definitely a mismatch between observed patterns in the present and the prediction of needs. I think the best example to talk about this is, it was Hayek said in his Nobel Prize lecture. He says, observing patterns in a ball game is not enough to predict the outcome of the game. Even if you know everything about the game players, I know this is one of Federico's special areas, but even if you know everything all about the players, you know all the rules, and you know about how the grass is and the weather is and everything, you can't predict the outcome of the game. And I think similarity with traffic, even if you can look at all people going and all cars and buses and subways and so on, you can't plan how people are going to travel. And for this reason, I think the restriction on mobility is something that's in the way for people's freedom, and that's also against free markets. And Hayek also wrote in Constitutional Liberty about urban planning that town planning is mostly motivated the desire to dispense with the price mechanism and replace it with central direction. It's carried out by architects and engineers who have never understood the role that prices play. And that also a big area actually corresponding to economy. A lot of money is changing hands in cities with urban planning, but we don't really know and see how it goes. But with restriction and on mobility and urban planning, the politicians can control a lot of the economy and our freedom. And I think more people in the our freedom movement should be looking at these issues. I have a favorite professor author in this area. It's Alain Berthaud from New York University. He's written an excellent book about urban planning. It's called Order Without Design. He explains how big cities are like big markets, and that mobility is the key for this. And he says that high density in a city is a result of thriving market, not something planners can create with the aim to replace traffic and mobility. And still we have a lot of politicians, they like really high-rise buildings and so on. But high-rise buildings, that's a result if the economy is very good. And you can see a lot of how politicians don't understand that in a lot of countries, a lot of cities. So Berthaud says that the objective of urban transport strategy should be to minimize the time required to reach the largest possible number of people, jobs, and amenities. And they should look for good mobility. But in reality, we see in a lot of countries and cities that politicians have other objectives. They want to reduce mobility. And what we create then is actually, in many cities, we're building the new walls around the cities actually that we had before before we got when we had guilds and regulated trade and so on. And we're building that kind of barriers now in the name of smart urban planning or smart cities or environmental issues and so on. So it's important to fight for good mobility in cities, but also good mobility that we could control for ourselves. So going back to mobility and economy, the case is, of course, going back to Adam Smith talking about how the specialization with the Scotsman living on the countryside have to be his own baker, butcher, and brewer. And with specialization, we not only got better, lower prices, we got also better beer, and so the specialization gets higher productivity, and we get better products and much other gains. And that's development we have in the economy. And we have more specialization will also give us better products and also increase our economy, but also that creates a need for transportation, ever more transportation. And that's what we see in the global economy. And now we are closing down value chains, and we can see how it is a disaster on the world economy. I think we have to go back, of course, to use this specialization, but probably will also perhaps have, in some way, we talk about value change, and I think we will perhaps have value networks in some way, where we have more producers doing same things and actually increase the competition. But that will also give us even more transportation, not less transportation and less mobility. So specialization makes our wealth, gives us wealth and better economy, but also give us more money to buy more transport and travel more. So I think we will have this is a good situation, a win-win situation. So keep up the fight for better mobility. That's my freedom issue for today's speak. And beware of politicians trying to favor centrally planned transportation systems. It's always I'm myself engineer, but I think a lot of engineers think that they could plan things smarter with mathematical formulas and so on, but there's not something that works. It works for companies that compete with each other, but to exchange everything with some sort of plan, that's a big danger for a free society. So I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders, very much. I would like to, well, there's a lot of, to unpack from what you said, but just starting from a question, there are lots of discussions about which industries are benefiting and will benefit from this corona crisis, let's say. And of course, the fintech industry most likely will benefit from it. Things like Zoom or StreamYard, what we are using now, definitely are benefiting from it. Some people even joke that Zoom unleashed the coronavirus. But yeah, jokes aside, for what you said, particularly at the beginning of your talk, the car industry might be a beneficiary of this crisis. And how do you see the car industry reacting to this? Do you think companies like Tesla could have the upper hand? How do you see the developments?
I think we can see that I've seen figures from China where they opened up that people are buying their second car. It's not perhaps buying more exclusive cars, but they actually think that more family members should have their cars to be safe on their transportation. So I think we will have a more, perhaps more, but perhaps smaller cars. And I think we can, I think a lot of urban mobility will has to be facilitated in that area. And I think the political idea to restrict cars has to be postponed, or most hopeful idea that we stop that kind of politics. I'm not against mass transit. I think it's a good with competition between, but I think the political preference to give like one mass transit company a monopoly, that's really sad and bad for a city. But I also think that individual mobility, like walking and bicycling, that's also individual mobility, that no one decides where and when you should go. That will also have a better market.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, by the same token, do you think that certain developments with the sharing economy, such as, sharing cars, motorcycles, things like that, will be hit by this crisis?
In the short term, I've seen a lot of discussions and studies that the conventional car rental business has a very good systems of cleaning cars and so. And if you share a car without cleaning, that's of course a restriction on the market as long as we have this crisis. And if will be longer, that will be a hit to that kind of sharing. And I think the conventional renting will have so. But of course, then I think the air transport. There is a question about that. I think, talking about Zoom and this kind of meetings, I think a lot of routine meetings will continue to be done on this kind of web systems. But I think to create something, to do sales and find out new ideas and make new friends, you have to meet in real life. So I think the need for real life meetings will be even perhaps. Yeah, I think the economy will work much better. We will have a lot of routine meetings without traveling, but we will have need for higher quality travel. The meetings that we will do in real life, we will actually be able to pay even more for them because they are so valuable. And I think we can see like companies like Google and Apple, they have built their own fantastic head offices. They really want people to go to their work every day so they can meet and exchange and create smart products. And I think Yahoo had it some years ago. I read that they have actually forbidden their employees to work from home. So I think these companies that really know how to use smart technology, they also know the need to people to meet in real life.
Yeah, definitely. And I believe IBM, that was one of the first to establish home office, reverse the measure that some time ago. Some of the things you mentioned are related to Mircea's question, but it would be great if you could go a little bit deeper on it. He asks from the sales drop of new cars within this period, which is 97% drop, and I take Mircea's number to be true. And with the drop in air transportation business, wouldn't mobility of individuals drop too?
I think looking at the car industry, I think we already can see from the sales in China that the rebound is really strong when the markets opens up. So I think the car industry will catch up really fast and even perhaps have a lift of the market compared with before. But I think on air transport, I think that depends on how you can handle security. And I think the big problem will probably be how the high cost there will be on security. But in the long term, or perhaps when this crisis is over, I think people will understand the value also of travel even more than today. And actually also be able perhaps even to pay more for air travel. So I agree totally with Mircea on the short-term perspective. In the long-term perspective, I think that wealth and freedom and a prosperous society is so strongly connected with mobility that we have to solve all the issues.
And during your talk, you mentioned something that I found extremely interesting, which is this idea. And sorry, I'm paraphrasing. I was taking notes. That we are building within our cities. We are building new walls and barriers due to in the name of becoming smart cities. And I was thinking of this, and you also mentioned of this accessibility concept, which can be extremely dangerous because cities could end up being like compartments that do not, relate to each other.
Yeah, exactly. I think in some way this is a public choice problem, that the people living in the city centers, they have paid a lot for their apartments, and when they live there, they don't want to have too much traffic around there where they live. They want, actually, in if they decide for themselves, they will probably have the city centers look the same as the outskirts, like we have more trees and walkability and so on. But a really smart city, that's a market for a much bigger area than itself. It has a smart city has a trade for a big area, and then you can have high paying services to the place for things that is higher prices on, and services that you get paid more, and so it has to be open, and that's perhaps one of the best things that we've done in Europe, when we opened up cities for the markets, from people going from the countryside and sell things and so on, and we tear down the walls from the cities. But we can see that, I think the politics today is that the people voting in the city centers, they vote for more restriction to keep it's a nice place to live in. But big, functioning city is a place also for trade and for services, and for more people than actually live in the city. But those people usually don't vote in the city. They live outside the city and vote in perhaps other communities and other municipalities. And that's a public choice dilemma, I think.
Indeed, and we literally have 3 minutes, but just very quickly, just to pick up from what you said, what do you think? What's the situation in Malmo, where you live, regarding, let's say, zoning, and what should be the ideal policy for you?
I think, first of all, people must understand how important mobility is for a city to work, and to give the people who live in the city actually how they thrive of people coming into the city with their money and buying and going to restaurants and so on. If the city should be closed, there should be only that'd be the lesser restaurants, lesser services and so on. And I think the politicians must understand that everyone is winner of bigger markets and open borders and more free markets. Everyone wins on that concept. And if closing that down, you can see how it works. So we see it in this crisis. Closing down markets it's a catastrophe for everyone.
Anders, thank you very much for being this Saturday afternoon with us. I think it was a pleasure listening to you. We learned a lot, and well, there will be plenty of opportunities in the future, I'm sure.
I have a war show for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and to everyone who's watching this. 3:20 CET, 4:20 Romania. We'll be back with Kai Weiss. He'll be talking about economic recovery, another very important topic, particularly after the collapse that all our economies are suffering due to these lockdowns. So see you on the next Facebook Live. And if you want to know more about events like this, please visit fmrs.digital. Thank you, and see you soon. And thanks again.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.